Okay, this is going to be a simple quarter of a sunflower. You could draw it from any corner. You just want to start with a curved line. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I like to turn it and make one full petal that you can see all of. So it's kind of diagonal and it's a sort of almond shape. And then as I'm drawing the others, they are going behind that one. And I just have to sort of imagine where the line would go behind the first petal. And I want to make sure that it looks like there are petals going all the way off the page. So it's really important that you're drawing all the way to the edge. And I just keep imagining where those extra lines would go, even though I'm not drawing them. So again, going behind the petal. And then want to make sure I'm keeping them even so they're about the same length. And keeping that almond shape and drawing all the way off the page so that it doesn't look like petals have been plucked. They're all full. And I want to imagine a circle that would go all the way around the sunflower, and that will help me keep my petals about the same length. I just don't want to have any that look a whole lot shorter than the others. So I'm just going to kind of go back and clean that up a little bit. I do find sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and draw off the page or off the space. So if you draw into the label area of the form, it doesn't matter. And I'm just cleaning up this side. I feel like this third petal needs to be a little bit wider. If you want to have a crease in your petal, you can add a little line, and we will darken that up later when we add color. Okay, now we're going to add color using the Portfolio watercolor-based oil pastels. And I'm using rust, and this is red, orange, and yellow. I may use a little bit of the red, but it comes out kind of pinkish, so mainly these three. And I'm going to start by tracing over my lines with the darkest color, which will be the rust. It's sort of a brownish red. And this will be in line with the sunflower colors. But if you guys want to choose a different set of colors, that's fine. Just remember that you want to make sure you aren't blending with complements because you'll end up with brown, which for a flower will not work very well. Also, another option would be to outline with Sharpie first if you're worried about your petals not standing out. So I'll show you an example of what that looks like when we get to the end. But right now I'm just going to outline with my rust oil pastel and also outlining those creases in the middle of my petals so they will look shaded after I blend. And now I'm going to take the darkest color and also add lines of color to the base of the petal because that's where we would see a sort of darker shading. And notice that I'm not coloring it in, I'm just adding lines, and they are only going about a quarter of the way up. They don't go very far up the petal. And I'm leaving some space in between. So my next step will be to come back with my middle color, which is the red orange, and go over those lines and make longer lines that extend about halfway up the petal. Now all of this will get blended together in just a minute, but for now I'm simply drawing lines of color. Okay, and now the lightest color, yellow. I'm going to do the same thing with the yellow. First, I'm just filling in at the base of the petal so that I make sure I have plenty of color there. And then I'm extending those lines all the way through most of the length of the petal. On this example, I'm going to leave some white at the tip so that I'll have some even lighter highlights where the white stays right here in the center. And then it's really up to you how light you want the petals to be. You could always add in more color. If I wanted more red orange, I could have added that. This is going to be a pretty light colored petal. And then if I want to have some color coming from the tips of the petals, I'm just going to turn it and drag my line the opposite direction. And this will keep that sort of white highlighted center. Okay, so now to blend, you want to hold the paper tight, press firmly with your thumb, and just swoop your way up, staying right inside of that petal. I'm staying right within the borders of the one petal that I'm working on, and then I'm just pressing, and I release the pressure towards the end so that it kind of gives it a wispy, streaky sort of motion. And I just need to do that with each one, staying within the petal as I go. Sometimes the spaces are kind of small and you do have to just be really careful. Notice that I'm not blending back and forth. I'm always going in that one direction. That works best for this style of petal and this way of working with the material. It also causes that folded line where my crease is to look like it's shaded. So I'm going to do this with the remainder of the petals, and then I'm going to turn and blend from the other direction because it's hard, since I'm trying to stay inside of the petal, it's hard to get that tip to blend without coming from that side. So I just flip it around and I'm working from the tip towards the center, still trying to leave some of those white spaces so I have a nice highlight. And you can always go back in and add more color if it's too light for what you're wanting. And for the square one art, you really do want to make sure you have color going all the way to the edge, because if you don't, when it gets printed onto something white, like a t-shirt or a mug, it's going to look like there's really not a frame or a border around it. So we want to try to get rid of white that's really close to the edge of the paper. Okay, and there we have it. That's all for blending the petals. Now I'm going to work on the center of the sunflower using green and brown, but first I just want to add some texture. You could do this if you wanted to, you don't have to, but you'll be able to see this Sharpie through the pastel. So this just kind of gives it a little bit of texture. And this is just an old Sharpie. It doesn't matter that you can't see much of it or that it's, you know, kind of faded. It's enough of a mark to show through the pastel, and that's all that matters. And I'm going to speed this part up, but I started out here with rust, but then I'm coming back through with green, and I just am sort of layering the green and the rust. And I could have done black, but I feel like that would be a little too dark, and then you wouldn't see that texture as much. So just kind of zigzagging in the color back and forth in layers of green and rust, which is close to a brown. It's the closest we have to brown in this pastel. So I'm going to speed this up, but you'll see me just kind of mixing in the colors until I like the way it looks. I just sort of did a little layering and lines and lots of overlapping. Okay, and now it's time to color in the background with a complementary color to make the rest of that flower really pop. But before I do that, I'm going to sign inside of my square so that there will be a signature for my square one art. And I'm going to use the border right along the top. Make sure you've got it in the right spot. That shows me the space I can write in. And I'm just going to find a good spot to sign my name that is not on the oil pastel, because oil pastel will make the Sharpie quit working. And if you want to put the year, you can do that as well. I like for it to just kind of curve with the flower. So now I'm ready to color in the background. I chose blue because it's a complement of orange, and I'm going to keep it light, but it's totally up to you. You could make it nice and dark if you want to, or your choice. And I'm using a crayon here, but you could use a colored pencil, or even if you wanted to use the oil pastels, it would be fine. There's just more of a risk of a lot of blending and smearing and that sort of thing when you use the oil pastel in the background. And you also want to make sure that you really have filled it in. You don't want to have any scribbly lines in the background or lots of big white spots in between your colored lines. It just doesn't show up well for square one art. Okay, now I want to show some other options using the same method. This flower is off center. It's not in the same spot, but off to the side or the corner. I've signed my name again, making sure that it was within the square. I used cool colors this time, but the same blending technique. And I used the complements of the blue and purple for the center and background. That would be yellow and orange. So same techniques, just different type of flower and different color palette. Here are some other options that you might like, just to give you some examples of other things that you could do.